The easiest way to lose the truth is to judge someone before the moon reveals who they really are. The words were carved into the oldest stone in Blackwood Kingdom, but after centuries of peace, almost no one remembered they existed. The grand courtyard shimmered beneath the glow of a crimson harvest moon as hundreds of wolves gathered in silence, their ceremonial cloaks stirring in the cool autumn breeze. Silver torches lined the marble path leading to the royal throne, where Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood without expression, his broad shoulders framed by banners bearing the ancient crest of the Northern Crown. Every heartbeat in the courtyard seemed to wait for a single decision. Claire Bennett stood alone at the center of the ceremonial circle, her simple ivory dress catching the moonlight in quiet contrast to the jeweled gowns surrounding her. She kept her hands folded, hiding the slight tremble in her fingers. She had never dreamed of becoming queen. She had only hoped the bond everyone spoke about since childhood might truly exist. Around her, whispers floated through the crowd like cold wind. She is only an Omega. She carries no noble name. She has no remarkable gift. The royal council watched with unreadable faces while the elders lowered their staffs, signaling that the moment had arrived. Ethan's silver eyes rested on Claire for what felt like an eternity. There was no cruelty in his expression, only certainty. When he finally spoke, his calm voice echoed across every corner of the courtyard. "Claire Bennett, I cannot accept you as my destined mate." The words landed with the quiet weight of winter snow, and for several long seconds no one moved. Then the silence broke into restrained murmurs that spread through the gathering like ripples across a frozen lake. Claire felt every gaze settle upon her. Heat rose into her cheeks, but she refused to lower her head. Somewhere deep inside, her wolf whimpered, not in anger, but in confusion. She had spent years believing destiny could not make mistakes. Yet destiny had just closed its door before the entire kingdom. Ethan gave a respectful nod, believing he had spared them both from a future built on uncertainty. The ceremony concluded as musicians quietly lowered their instruments and nobles drifted into small circles, already discussing the unexpected rejection. No one noticed Claire slipping away through the towering stone archway that led toward the forgotten gardens behind the palace. The farther she walked, the quieter the celebration became until only the sound of leaves rustling above remained. The night air smelled of pine, damp earth, and approaching rain. She paused beside an ancient monument nearly swallowed by ivy, a weathered slab of pale stone older than the kingdom itself. Exhaustion settled over her heart. She reached out absent-mindedly, placing one hand against the cool surface as she struggled to steady her breathing. A tiny thorn hidden among the vines brushed her fingertip. It was barely enough to leave a mark, yet a single crimson drop slipped from her finger and landed upon the faded carving. For an instant, nothing happened. Claire sighed, unaware that history had quietly taken its first breath. Then the ancient stone answered. A soft silver glow pulsed beneath the moss, spreading through forgotten symbols that had slept for generations. The light vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Claire stepped back, blinking in surprise. Had she imagined it? The monument stood silent once more beneath the moon, as if nothing had changed. Shaking her head, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, believing the night had ended with nothing more than heartbreak. High above the courtyard, hidden behind stained glass overlooking the palace grounds, an elderly royal historian froze in disbelief. His trembling hands tightened around a leather journal that had not been opened in over 40 years. From that distance, he had seen the impossible flash. He whispered a single sentence that no one else could hear. "The first blood has awakened." Claire Bennett walked until the palace lights became distant stars behind the towering pines, each step carrying her farther from the voices that had witnessed her quiet humiliation. The cool night wrapped around her shoulders like a familiar friend, and for the first time since the ceremony, she allowed herself to breathe without forcing a smile. She did not resent Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. That surprised her most. Deep inside, she believed he had acted according to what he thought was right, yet the ache inside her chest remained, gentle but relentless, like rain that refused to stop falling. She reached the small cottage where she had lived with her grandmother Eleanor since childhood, a modest home resting at the edge of Silver Creek, where the sound of flowing water had always quieted troubled hearts. The windows were dark except for a single candle still burning in the kitchen. Eleanor sat beside it, as though she had been waiting all night. Her silver hair reflected the candlelight, and although age had softened her movements, her blue eyes remained bright with an understanding that seemed older than memory itself. She looked at Claire for only a moment before offering a warm cup of tea without asking a single question. Claire accepted it with trembling hands. "He rejected me," she whispered at last. Eleanor nodded gently, almost as though she had expected those words for years. "Sometimes rejection protects the future before the future is ready to reveal itself," she replied softly. Claire tried to smile, but confusion outweighed comfort. She thought about the strange flash beneath the ancient stone in the palace garden, wondering if exhaustion had played tricks on her eyes. Before she could mention it, a sudden knock echoed through the quiet cottage. Both women turned toward the door. Standing outside was an elderly traveler wrapped in a weathered gray cloak, carrying a lantern that glowed with an unusually pale light. He introduced himself simply as Samuel, a keeper of forgotten records who had spent decades traveling between abandoned libraries and ruined temples. His voice was calm, but urgency lingered beneath every word. "Forgive the late hour," he said. "I came because something impossible happened tonight." Eleanor invited him inside without hesitation, as though she had known he would eventually arrive. Samuel placed an old leather journal upon the table. Its pages were worn smooth with age, filled with sketches of symbols that looked remarkably similar to the faded markings carved into the ancient monument behind the palace. Claire leaned closer. One illustration made her heartbeat quicken. It matched the glowing pattern she believed she had imagined. Samuel looked directly into her eyes. "You touched the first stone." Claire slowly shook her head. "It was only an old monument." Samuel gently closed the journal. "No, it is older than every kingdom that stands today. It has remained silent for nearly 1,000 years. Eleanor quietly stood and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a small wooden chest wrapped in faded blue cloth. Claire had seen the chest many times growing up, but her grandmother had never allowed anyone to open it. Eleanor placed it carefully on the table before her granddaughter. Her hands lingered on the weathered wood for several seconds, almost unwilling to let go. "Your mother asked me to protect this until the moon chose its moment," she said. Claire felt a chill run across her skin. "Mother knew about this?" Eleanor nodded, sadness softening her expression. "She knew far more than I was ever allowed to tell you." Samuel stepped back respectfully as Eleanor unlocked the tiny silver clasp. Inside rested a folded letter tied with a faded white ribbon and a delicate pendant shaped like a crescent moon surrounding a tiny crystal unlike any stone Claire had ever seen. Beneath them lay a single piece of parchment, aged almost beyond recognition. Claire carefully unfolded the letter first. The handwriting belonged to her mother. Every curve of every letter felt painfully familiar. Her eyes filled with tears as she read the first sentence aloud. "If this letter has reached your hands, it means destiny has already begun searching for you." She turned the page with unsteady fingers until one final line stopped her breath completely. "Whatever happens, never let a king see your blood." Claire lowered the letter slowly, her fingers trembling as though the paper itself carried the weight of generations. The room had fallen completely silent. Even the crackling fire seemed to soften, as if the cottage understood that something long forgotten had finally begun to awaken. She looked from the final sentence to her grandmother, searching for an explanation that might make the impossible feel ordinary again. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "Your mother never feared the kings," she said quietly. "She feared what they would discover if they ever learned who you truly are." Claire looked down at the crescent pendant resting inside the wooden chest. The tiny crystal hidden at its center shimmered with a pale silver light that had not been there a moment before. Samuel noticed it immediately. His calm expression changed for the first time since entering the cottage. "It recognizes her," he whispered. "That should not be possible." Claire reached toward the pendant almost without thinking. The instant her fingertips touched the cool metal, a gentle warmth spread through her hand, then her wrist, and finally her heartbeat. It did not hurt. Instead, it felt strangely familiar, like hearing a lullaby she had forgotten years ago. Faint images flickered through her mind. Endless forests glowing beneath moonlight. towering white wolves standing beside an ancient stone circle. A woman with kind blue eyes smiling as she placed the same pendant around a small child's neck. The vision disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving Claire staring at the necklace in stunned silence. Before anyone could speak again, another knock echoed against the front door. This one was firmer than before. Samuel moved carefully toward the window without making a sound. Pulling the curtain aside only an inch, he looked outside before immediately stepping back. "Royal messengers," he said in a low voice. "They are searching every home near the palace." Claire's heartbeat quickened. "For me?" Samuel slowly nodded. "No official announcement has been made, but news travels quickly among those who study old legends. Someone saw the first stone shine tonight. They know a witness exists. They simply do not know who." Eleanor gently closed the wooden chest and wrapped it once again inside the faded blue cloth. "Then they must not find this." Claire looked toward the front door as another polite knock sounded through the cottage. There was no panic inside her now, only questions multiplying faster than answers. Eleanor quietly motioned for Samuel to open the back entrance leading toward the creek. "Go," she whispered. "Follow the old river path until sunrise. There is someone waiting who still remembers our family." Claire hesitated. "I cannot leave you here alone." Eleanor smiled with the quiet confidence only a grandmother could carry. "I have spent my entire life protecting one secret. I can protect it for one more night." Samuel opened the back door, allowing the crisp autumn air to sweep into the room. Claire slipped the pendant around her neck and carefully tucked the folded letter beneath her coat. She gave Eleanor one final embrace before stepping into the darkness beside the narrow stream that wound through the forest. Behind her, the front door opened as the royal messengers politely greeted Eleanor. Their voices faded beneath the whisper of flowing water. Claire and Samuel walked for nearly a mile beneath towering pine trees, guided only by moonlight filtering through the branches. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence finally broke when Samuel stopped beside an abandoned stone bridge. He looked toward the sky before quietly saying, "There is something I have not told you." Claire turned to face him. "What is it?" Samuel took a slow breath. "The first stone does not awaken because someone touches it. It awakens because it recognizes a bloodline that has not walked this kingdom for nearly 1,000 years. Claire instinctively placed a hand over the pendant resting against her heart. Before she could ask another question, the crystal suddenly pulsed with brilliant silver light, and somewhere deep within the sleeping forest, a long-forgotten bell rang once. Even though no church, no village, and no tower stood within miles of where they were. The lonely bell echoed across the sleeping forest long after its single note had faded, leaving the night strangely still. Claire Bennett stood motionless beneath the ancient stone bridge, her hand resting against the glowing pendant beneath her coat, while Samuel stared into the darkness with growing concern. "It was never supposed to ring again," he whispered. "Not until the rightful blood returned." Claire searched the silent woods, expecting someone to emerge, but only the wind answered, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant rain through the towering trees. "Who could hear it?" she asked quietly. Samuel looked toward the northern mountains where the royal citadel rested beyond the forest. "Anyone whose family has guarded the old prophecies." Nearly 15 miles away, inside Blackwood Palace, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood alone in the Hall of Ancestors. Sleep had refused to come. Ever since the ceremony ended, an unfamiliar feeling had settled over him. Not regret exactly, but an uneasy sense that something had slipped beyond his understanding. He found himself staring at the ancient mural behind the royal throne, one he had passed thousands of times without truly seeing it. Moonlight streamed through the cathedral windows, illuminating faded carvings of wolves kneeling before a woman whose face had almost disappeared beneath centuries of dust. As Ethan studied the forgotten image, the massive bronze doors opened quietly behind him. The palace historian, Arthur Holloway, entered carrying several weathered scrolls and an enormous leather-bound volume. The elderly scholar bowed respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, something extraordinary happened tonight." Ethan turned toward him. "Does this concern the ceremony?" Arthur hesitated only briefly before nodding. "It concerns what happened after the ceremony." He carefully opened the oldest book upon a marble table. The pages were brittle with age, filled with sketches drawn by hands that had long since turned to dust. One illustration immediately caught Ethan's attention. It showed the same weathered monument hidden within the palace gardens. Beneath it appeared unfamiliar symbols surrounding a single sentence written in elegant script. Arthur slowly translated the ancient language aloud. When the first stone awakens, the forgotten blood shall return, and every throne built upon silence shall face the truth. Ethan's expression hardened with curiosity rather than fear. The first stone is only a monument. Arthur looked directly into the king's eyes. It was never merely a monument. For 900 years it has served as a witness. Ethan remained silent as the historian turned another fragile page. This illustration depicted a crescent-shaped pendant surrounding a crystal that glowed with pale silver light. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow. The shape looked strangely familiar, although he could not remember why. Arthur gently touched the drawing with careful fingers. The royal archives record only one family capable of awakening the stone. Ethan folded his arms. What family? The historian lowered his voice until it became little more than a whisper. The Moonborn line. The name meant nothing to Ethan, yet the room suddenly felt colder. Arthur continued. Their blood vanished nearly 1,000 years ago. Every official record claims they disappeared without descendants, but older journals suggest something entirely different. Ethan studied the faded illustrations in silence. His thoughts drifted unexpectedly toward Claire Bennett. Her calm dignity during the rejection, the strange sadness in her eyes, the overwhelming feeling that he had overlooked something important. He shook the thought away. It made no sense. Claire had lived quietly her entire life. She possessed no noble title, no visible power, and no place within royal history. Yet for reasons he could not explain, her face refused to leave his mind. Arthur closed the ancient volume with unusual care. There is one more detail, Your Majesty. Ethan raised his eyes. Speak freely. The historian inhaled slowly before answering. According to every surviving record, the first stone never awakens on its own. It awakens only after recognizing the blood of its rightful heir. Ethan walked toward the towering window overlooking the moonlit gardens where the ceremony had taken place only hours earlier. Somewhere beyond those walls, hidden beneath the same moonlight, Claire Bennett had disappeared into the night, carrying answers neither of them yet understood. At that exact moment, far beyond the palace, the crystal resting against Claire's heart glowed once more, brighter than before and deep beneath the mountains surrounding Blackwood Kingdom. Another ancient stone quietly answered its call. The first light of dawn filtered through the towering pines as Claire Bennett and Samuel followed the winding trail deeper into the northern wilderness. Morning mist drifted across the narrow path, wrapping the forest in a quiet stillness that made every distant birdsong seem unusually clear. Claire had barely slept. The pendant resting beneath her coat continued to pulse with a faint warmth, almost like a second heartbeat, keeping perfect rhythm with her own. She reached for it several times, but each touch only deepened the strange feeling that something ahead was waiting specifically for her. Samuel walked several steps in front of her, checking old landmarks that had nearly disappeared beneath vines and moss. We are close, he finally said. There used to be a sanctuary beyond these hills. Very few people even remember it existed. Claire glanced around. The trees seemed older here, their enormous branches forming a natural ceiling high above the trail. Everything felt untouched by time. As they rounded a bend, a faint whimper drifted through the woods. Claire stopped immediately. Did you hear that? Samuel nodded cautiously, but before he could answer, Claire was already moving toward the sound. Hidden beneath the roots of a fallen oak lay a small white wolf pup. Its snowy fur was damp from the morning dew, and one tiny paw was trapped beneath a broken tree branch that had collapsed during the previous night's storm. The frightened animal looked up with bright silver eyes filled with uncertainty rather than fear. Claire slowly knelt several feet away, careful not to startle it. It is all right, she whispered softly. You are safe now. The little wolf watched her without pulling away. Samuel approached carefully. We should not linger, he warned. The forest is no longer as empty as it once was. Claire gently lifted the branch just enough to free the pup's paw. The moment she touched its soft fur, warmth flowed through her hands exactly as it had when she held the pendant. Golden light shimmered faintly around her fingers before disappearing almost instantly. Into the little wolf. The pup blinked several times, then cautiously placed weight on its injured paw. It took one step, then another. Within seconds it was standing normally, its silver eyes fixed upon Claire with quiet wonder. She stared in disbelief. What just happened? Samuel did not answer immediately. His face had gone completely pale. That was not ordinary healing, he finally whispered. I have read about it, but I never believed I would see it. The little wolf gently pressed its nose against Claire's hand before happily trotting several yards away. Instead of disappearing into the trees, it paused and looked back, almost inviting them to follow. Claire exchanged a puzzled glance with Samuel before walking after it. The pup led them through a narrow passage hidden between two enormous boulders covered in thick emerald moss. Beyond the rocks stood the ruins of an ancient sanctuary unlike anything Claire had ever imagined. Marble columns, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, circled a quiet courtyard where wildflowers now bloomed freely between cracked stone paths. At the center rested a circular platform engraved with symbols almost identical to those carved into the first stone behind the royal palace. As Claire stepped into the courtyard, the pendant beneath her coat began glowing brighter than ever before. One by one, the faded carvings surrounding the platform answered with soft silver light until the entire sanctuary shimmered beneath the morning sun. Samuel slowly removed his hat, his eyes wide with reverence. This place has been asleep for generations, he whispered. It should not recognize anyone. Claire felt an invisible pull guiding her toward the center of the platform. She had barely taken another step when a gentle female voice echoed through the silent sanctuary, clear as though someone stood only a few feet away. Welcome home, child of the first blood. Claire stopped instantly, her breath catching in her throat. There was no one standing anywhere within the ruins. Yet the voice carried warmth, kindness, and unmistakable familiarity. Before she could gather the courage to speak, every ancient symbol surrounding the platform burst into brilliant silver light, and high above the sanctuary, hidden beyond the clouds themselves, a single beam of sunlight broke through the morning sky as though the heavens had finally found the one they had been waiting for. Claire Bennett remained perfectly still as the gentle voice faded into the quiet air, yet its warmth lingered around her like the last rays of sunrise. She looked across the empty sanctuary, searching every marble column and every weathered archway, but no living soul stood before her. Only the silver symbols continued glowing beneath her feet, pulsing with the same calm rhythm as the pendant resting against her heart. Samuel slowly stepped onto the edge of the ancient platform, his eyes filled with disbelief. The sanctuary has accepted you, he whispered. No one has crossed this place in centuries without silence answering them. Claire lowered her gaze to the glowing carvings beneath her boots. Who spoke to me? Samuel gently shook his head. I do not know. Some believe the sanctuary remembered every guardian who ever walked here. Others believe the moon goddess herself left echoes behind for those carrying the first blood. Before Claire could answer, the silver light surrounding the platform gathered into countless tiny strands that drifted upward like glowing ribbons dancing through the morning air. They circled above her before slowly weaving together into the outline of an elegant woman wearing flowing robes that shimmered like moonlight across fresh snow. Her face remained softly blurred, as though memory itself refused to reveal every detail, yet kindness radiated from her presence. Claire instinctively felt tears gathering in her eyes without understanding why. The glowing figure smiled gently. You have carried our name without knowing it, the voice said. You have walked in humility while others measured worth through titles and power. That is why the sanctuary opened its gates. Claire struggled to steady her breathing. Who am I? The luminous figure raised one graceful hand toward the ancient carvings surrounding the courtyard. Instantly, the silver symbols transformed into living scenes from a forgotten age. Claire saw vast kingdoms standing beneath brighter skies, wolves and humans living together in harmony. And at the center of every gathering stood men and women wearing the same crescent emblem that now rested around her neck. They did not rule through fear. They guided through wisdom, compassion, and service. The vision shifted once more. Claire watched families leaving magnificent halls, hiding sacred records, sealing ancient stones, and quietly disappearing into ordinary villages as though they wished the world to forget them forever. The gentle voice returned. When pride sought the throne, your ancestors chose peace instead of power. They protected hope by becoming invisible. Their blood was never lost. It was simply hidden until the kingdom was ready to remember. Claire felt her heart tighten as every piece of the journey slowly began fitting together. The strange monument behind the palace, her mother's final letter, the glowing pendant, the forgotten bell. None of it had been coincidence. Samuel lowered himself respectfully onto one knee, overcome by the truth unfolding before his eyes. The moonborn line survived, he said quietly. Every historian believed it had vanished. The glowing figure turned once more toward Claire. Blood alone does not make a true heir. Character does. Compassion does. The greatest crown is carried within the heart before it is ever placed upon the head. As the final words echoed across the sanctuary, the radiant figure slowly dissolved into thousands of tiny silver lights that floated upward and disappeared into the clear blue sky. At that exact moment, far away inside Blackwood Palace, a messenger rushed into the royal council chamber, carrying an ancient scroll recently uncovered beneath the royal archives. Across its faded parchment, one sentence appeared more clearly than the rest. When the daughter of the first blood returns, the kingdom must choose whether it will honor truth or cling to forgotten pride. Claire Bennett stood quietly in the center of the forgotten sanctuary as the last traces of silver light faded into the clear morning sky. The ancient platform beneath her feet slowly returned to stone, but the warmth within her heart remained. It no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt like purpose. Samuel rose from one knee with tears glistening in his eyes, still unable to fully accept what he had witnessed. For my entire life, I searched for proof that the moonborn line had survived, he said softly. I believed I was preserving history. I never imagined history would answer me. Claire looked toward the distant mountains where Blackwood Palace rested beyond the forests. If everything the sanctuary revealed is true, why was my family hidden for so many generations? Samuel took a slow breath before answering. Because power attracts those who wish to control it. Your ancestors chose to disappear rather than allow their bloodline to become a prize. Before Claire could ask another question, the little white wolf pup appeared once more between the marble columns. Instead of running toward her, it looked back over its shoulder as though urging them to follow. Samuel smiled faintly. It seems we still have a guide. They followed the young wolf through a narrow passage behind the sanctuary until the path opened onto a cliff overlooking the valley. From there, Claire could see nearly the entire kingdom stretching beneath the bright afternoon sun. Villages rested beside winding rivers. Forests rolled across endless hills. Far in the distance, the towers of Blackwood Palace rose above the landscape like silent guardians. Claire had lived in this kingdom her entire life, yet it suddenly looked different. It was no longer simply the place where she had been rejected. It was the home her ancestors had quietly protected for centuries. At that same moment inside the royal council chamber, every senior alpha and elder had gathered around the enormous oak table where the newly discovered scroll rested open. The atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. Arthur Holloway carefully finished reading the final passage aloud. Silence followed. One elder finally looked toward Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. If these records are authentic, then the woman you rejected may belong to the oldest royal bloodline our kingdom has ever known. Ethan remained standing beside the tall windows, overlooking the palace gardens. His expression revealed little, yet his thoughts had become impossible to ignore. Since the ceremony, memories of Claire returned again and again. The quiet dignity in her voice, the kindness she showed even after disappointment, the strange feeling that the moment she walked away, something greater had left with her. He slowly turned toward the council. This changes nothing about her character, he said calmly. She was honorable before any of us knew her history. Arthur lowered his head respectfully. Exactly, Your Majesty. That is what makes this discovery so important. Before anyone could respond, the great bronze doors swung open. A royal scout hurried inside, breathing heavily after a long ride. He bowed quickly before speaking. Your Majesty, we have confirmed unusual activity at the ancient northern sanctuary. Every forgotten monument surrounding the valley has begun glowing for the first time in recorded history. The room fell completely silent. Several elders exchanged uneasy glances, but Ethan's eyes remained steady. He did not see a threat. He saw a question that demanded an answer. Without hesitation, he reached for his traveling cloak. "Prepare my horse," he ordered. "I will go there myself." Hundreds of miles away, Claire stood at the edge of the cliff as a gentle breeze lifted her hair. The pendant against her heart suddenly grew warm once again. She closed her eyes for only a moment, sensing that someone had begun searching for her, not out of obligation, but because destiny itself had quietly set two very different paths on a course that neither of them could turn away from. The journey back toward Blackwood Kingdom began beneath a sky washed with soft afternoon light. Yet Claire Bennett no longer walked with the uncertainty that had followed her only days before. Every step felt steadier, not because she suddenly possessed all the answers, but because she had finally discovered the truth about who she had always been. Samuel traveled beside her in thoughtful silence, while the little white wolf pup happily wandered a few yards ahead, occasionally glancing back as if making certain they continued along the right path. The forest seemed different now. Birds sang more freely among the branches, wildflowers swayed beside the trail, and even the cool breeze carried a quiet sense of welcome. Claire rested one hand over the crescent pendant beneath her coat. Its warmth had become comforting rather than mysterious. She realized something important during the long walk. The sanctuary had never promised her a throne. It had reminded her to remain the person she had always been. Compassion had opened every forgotten door long before ancient blood had revealed itself. Several hours later, they reached a peaceful crossroads where an old stone fountain stood beneath a massive oak tree. Travelers often paused there before continuing toward neighboring villages. As Claire filled a small cup with fresh spring water, she noticed a young boy sitting quietly beside the fountain. His ankle was wrapped in a worn cloth, and although he tried to hide his discomfort, his expression revealed the effort each movement required. Claire immediately knelt beside him. "May I help you?" she asked gently. The boy nodded with quiet embarrassment. His grandmother thanked Claire with kind eyes while explaining that they had been walking since sunrise after their wagon broke down several miles away. Claire carefully removed the old cloth and examined the swollen ankle. She smiled reassuringly before placing both hands lightly around it. Once again, the familiar warmth flowed through her fingertips. The golden glow remained almost invisible beneath the afternoon sunlight, yet the boy's expression slowly changed from discomfort to relief. After a few moments, he carefully stood. He took one cautious step, then another, before smiling with amazement. "It does not hurt anymore," he whispered. His grandmother embraced him with grateful tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "The moon has truly blessed your heart." Claire simply smiled. She accepted their gratitude without mentioning ancient bloodlines or forgotten prophecies. To her, helping someone in need felt as natural as breathing. Samuel watched the entire moment quietly before speaking once the travelers continued on their way. "That is why the sanctuary chose you," he said. "Anyone else would have celebrated the power. You simply saw someone who needed kindness." Claire lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "If my family protected this gift for generations, then it should never become something that places me above others." Samuel nodded with quiet admiration. "You already understand what many rulers spend their lives trying to learn." Far ahead, the sound of approaching horses drifted through the trees. Claire looked toward the forest road just as several royal riders emerged between the pines, their banners bearing the silver crest of Blackwood Palace. At their head rode Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. He immediately guided his horse to a stop several yards away rather than rushing forward. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried no resentment, only honesty waiting to be acknowledged. Ethan slowly stepped down from his horse and removed the royal cloak from his shoulders, not as a display of authority, but as a sign of respect. His silver eyes met Claire's with quiet sincerity. "I came because I owe you the truth," he said. Claire remained calm, her expression gentle but composed. She had once stood before him hoping to be chosen. Now she stood before him fully knowing her own worth, whether anyone recognized it or not. The breeze lifted the edge of her coat as the pendant beneath it shimmered softly, and somewhere high above the forest canopy, the clouds slowly parted, allowing warm sunlight to fall equally upon them both. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood quietly beneath the great oak as sunlight filtered through the branches, warming the forest floor where destiny had brought them together once again. He looked at Claire Bennett with complete honesty, no longer seeing the quiet Omega who had stood alone before the royal court, but the woman whose compassion had awakened forgotten history without ever seeking recognition. When I rejected you, Ethan said softly, I believed I was protecting the kingdom from uncertainty. I did not realize I was turning away from the very qualities a kingdom needs most. Claire listened without anger. The pain she had carried only days before had been transformed into understanding. She smiled gently, not because the past no longer mattered, but because it no longer controlled her future. You judged me before either of us knew the truth, she replied. But my worth was never created by my bloodline. It was always there. We simply could not see it. Ethan lowered his head in quiet respect. You are right. There was no excuse in his voice and no attempt to erase what had happened. Only humility. Samuel watched from a respectful distance while the little white wolf rested peacefully beneath the tree, as though even the forest understood that this moment belonged to them alone. Ethan slowly removed the royal signet ring from his hand and held it in his open palm. I cannot ask you to become queen because of prophecy, he said. I cannot ask because of your family or because of ancient promises. If one day you ever choose to walk beside me, I hope it will be because I have earned your trust through my actions. Claire looked at the ring for only a moment before gently closing Ethan's hand around it. Then keep it, she said with a warm smile. A crown should never be offered before character has been proven. Let us begin there. Ethan smiled for the first time since the ceremony beneath the blood moon. It was not the smile of a king giving an order. It was the smile of a man grateful for a second chance. Together they returned to Blackwood Palace, not as ruler and subject, but as two people willing to build a better future than the one they had inherited. When the royal council learned the complete truth of the Moonborn line, they expected Claire to demand power or privilege. Instead, she asked for something entirely different. She requested new schools where every young wolf, whether alpha, beta, or omega, would be taught that kindness was not weakness and that true leadership began with service. The request surprised the entire kingdom, yet it became the foundation of a new era. In the months that followed, the forgotten sanctuaries slowly awakened across the land, not because an ancient bloodline sought control, but because hope had finally returned where fear had once ruled. The old stories were rewritten, not to glorify a single family, but to remind every generation that greatness is revealed through compassion long before it is recognized by the world. And whenever travelers asked how such a remarkable change had begun, the elders simply smiled and answered, it began the day one woman's heart remained gentle after it had every reason to become bitter. Above the palace, the moon rose quietly over Blackwood Kingdom, shining with the same calm light upon every home, every family, and every dream waiting to be discovered. If Claire's journey reminded you that true worth comes from character rather than appearances, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in hope and second chances, and leave a comment telling us what moment touched your heart the most and what you would have done if you had stood in Claire's place.